Hi, I'm Malika Bilal.
And I'm Omar Badar, and you're in the stream.
Today, India's water wars. As a local fight boils over, what's the answer to a national crisis?
Violence is not a solution to any problem. It is a fact, it is true. We have to maintain peace and tranquility in the society.
A water dispute between two southern states has sparked riots in India. The tech hub of Bengaluru was virtually shut down as protesters attacked buildings and torched dozens of buses. 2 people died, more than 15,000 police officers were deployed, and curfews were imposed.
Now, at issue here is a Supreme Court ruling that forces the state of Karnataka to release more water from the Kaveri River to neighbouring Tamil Nadu. The two states have fought over the Kaveri since the 19th century, and Tamil Nadu says Karnataka takes more than its share, while Karnataka says Tamil Nadu wants more than it's entitled to. And just today, the Supreme Court extended its order for another week, but Karnataka says it doesn't have enough water to comply.
In times of normal rainfall, these tensions don't flare, but India faces record levels of drought. That's part of why its water problems are among the worst in the world. An estimated 1 billion Indians face water scarcity for at least a month each year. A record number of Indians lack access to clean water. And the problem could only deepen as the population grows and the planet heats up. Experts say India is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. So, without bold action, is the water war in southern India a sign of things to come? Well, joining us to discuss, Aman Sethi, a journalist and author in New Delhi. Mandakini Suri, Senior Program Officer for the Asia Foundation, also in New Delhi. Janaka Rajan Srinivasan, Professor at the Madras Institute of Development Studies, is joining us from Chennai. And Leo Saldana is a coordinator for the Environment Support Group in Bengaluru. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Leo, you joined the protests last week, but perhaps not as willingly as some of the other people who were out there. Tell us what happened to you.
Well, I was getting back home last Monday when the protest broke out by about noon, and buses were being torched and cars were set on fire. So it took a while for me to really find a safe passage, and I was blocked at least 5 or 6 times. The protesters were basically checking if I could speak Kannada, the local language in Bangalore, and I would be allowed to pass through. So basically, it was a politics of identity and divide based on language. And in one point, they actually asked me to get out and join them. If I didn't, obviously they would have thrashed my car. So I had to do that unwillingly, as I said. I didn't feel good about it at all. And that shows the tension on the streets that thousands and thousands of people have suffered. I'm sure it's the same in Tamil Nadu, where you're sort of, asked to show your devotion to a language. Unfortunately, not to the river.
So, Malika, we actually got several video comments from people who were on the ground who talked about their experience with the protests. Check it out.
The violence broke out in the city after the Supreme Court's judgment to share water with Tamil Nadu. We went out there to report, and we could spot few lorries with the Tamil Nadu number plates being set on fire. The pro-Kannada activists did also set tires in the middle of the road on fire.
I could see smoke rising in the distance. Around 40 buses and lorries were burned. Thousands of commuters were stuck because the metro and the other transportations stopped plying.
I can still hear the slogan, "We are ready to give our blood, not the water." They were waving the bicolor Kannada flags.
So, Janak, do you see this as potentially expanding and escalating from here, or do you think the violence is slowly getting behind us at this point?
No, not at all. I think the violence is really going to go up. In fact, the Associated Chamber of Commerce has suffered the total loss to the tune of something like $3.5 billion. It's such a huge loss, and all business houses and everything was closed actually for a week. And in fact, Bangalore city is considered the IT hub of the nation, and it was also considered the Silicon Valley of India. Unfortunately, this kind of a shocking incidents and a series of repeated episodes have been taking place. It is just not the first time that happened in 2016. But the worst was in 1991 when 100,000 people were really fleeing from Bangalore city towards Tamil Nadu, and several $billion worth of property were damaged and were set on fire. It was absolutely shocking, and it's all for water. This time, in order to get something like 17,000 million cubic feet of water, there was a loss of $3.55 billion. So you look at the kind of equation that one is confronting here. It is absolutely shocking, and it's all because of extreme politicization of the dispute. All the parties, successive governments, both in the center as well as in the state, have fueled this dispute, and they found there's a lot of vote bank in this water politics, and they fueled it, and that's the main reason. Now it is too late to resolve it. That's the problem. That's why.
So I want to pause you just because you made several good points there, Janak, and you said you see the violence going up. So I want to show this tweet. This is actually from the Bengaluru City Police. As a preventative measure, Section 144 of the Criminal Code will continue until September 25th in Bengaluru. Strong bandobast will continue, and basically translating this for our non-Indian audience, Section 144 is the code that says an assembly of more than 5 people cannot gather, and the police are saying they're still going to have a very heavy presence out in the streets, and they use this hashtag here, no need to panic. So clearly there is a sense that these protests will continue and they will get worse. Aman, why are we seeing this now?
Well, the first thing is that Section 144 has been largely imposed over Delhi on a near permanent basis. So imposing Section 144 is, it's a problem, but it's not catastrophic. Why are we seeing this now? I think that one, of course, is that this is a period where there is not enough water in either Karnataka or Tamil Nadu. This is also a period when this is what we call the kind of silly season of politics, where August session is over. We're looking forward to the next session of Parliament. So I think a lot of the stage setting for what will happen in Parliament going forward into the winter session happens now. So this is one of the reasons why I'm not in any way downplaying this, but I'm saying that this happens in a certain context of Indian political life and Indian public life.
So one of the things that Janak said earlier is that this conflict, this basically argument has been politicized. And one of the things that people usually resort to resolve political disputes is to the courts. So we have the Supreme Court judgment, but we still have people who are disputing whether that was appropriate, like Muhammad over here, who tweeted in saying, shame on the Supreme Court for the biased verdict. At least they could have distributed the water equally. While Zulfir over here says there is no immediate solution. The people of the country should respect the court verdict, but yet the people continue to fight against that verdict. Mandakini, what is your sense of the Supreme Court's decision here? Is it an appropriate action that they took that people should listen to as a way of resolving things? Or do you think there's anything out of line that the Supreme Court did?
Well, I think it's a very complex issue. I mean, when we think about water, I mean, it's a very politically charged issue. It's very obviously emotionally evocative as well. And I think as Aman pointed out, in this instance, you've got a situation where we've had a very intense drought over the last few years. The summer was particularly intense. While we have seen rainfall in some parts of the country, in the Kaveri Basin in particular, rainfall was in a deficit. And I think as far as the Supreme Court's decision is concerned, obviously, as you pointed out at the beginning, this has been a long-running dispute. And the court's decision, I just think, comes at a very particularly crisis moment in both the states, where, as Aman again pointed out, there's just not enough water. And I think many people are questioning, well, that the Supreme Court's decision maybe needed to be based on more data and information in terms of, recognizing the fact that reservoirs in Karnataka, many of them are at less than 30%. So I think the fundamental question is, in a drought year, in a crisis year, how do governments, how do institutions in both states really deal with an issue of crisis, which affects both, in a sense, equally?
Leo, I'm interested. Go ahead.
Well, and I'd just like to make the larger point that the problem that we see...
I hear Janak talking and I hear Aman talking. So Aman, you go ahead first and then we'll go to Janak after.
Right. So I just think that in India, a lot of issues actually end up in court, which may not probably result in court. So we've seen a period, particularly in environment policy, whether it is the fuel that buses are running on, or how long a car should run on the roads before it's taken off the roads. These are kind of policy decisions that scientists should sit and think about. But unfortunately, a lot of these decisions end up in court, and so you have judges sitting and kind of weighing various bits of data, which judges may not necessarily be the best people to decide on. So a kind of problem with politics means that everyone just says, let's send it to the courts, when these things can actually be resolved outside court. And the problem is that once they go to court, if you don't follow it, then you're in contempt of court. So there's a problem with this as well. So I can understand people expressing frustration that the Supreme Court is deciding how much water should be released on a daily basis, right? I mean, I don't know if the judiciary is the best people to make this decision.
Janak, so is this a job for the courts?
Yeah, actually, I agree with him. But then I just wanted to add also one other issue. See, India has got 24 unresolved interstate water disputes. Some are resolved, some are unresolved. But the Kaveri water dispute is distinctly different from other disputes, because in the case of Kaveri water dispute, the dispute is over resharing of the already utilized water. Whereas in the case of other disputes, the interstate disputes about sharing of the surplus water. So that is the key issue. So in the case of Kaveri, there is no problem at all in surplus years. The problem occurs only because there is a deficit and only in deficit years. So I think this is precisely the issue in which the Karnataka differs. Karnataka always makes a point that our reservoirs are half full or half empty. There is no water, therefore we cannot afford to share. I think that attitude should change, because whether there is a deficit or surplus, I think water there should be shared with the downstream the riparian state. I think if that happens, I think there is no conflict here. That's an extremely important point.
So Leo, I want to just pause this just for a second, because I want to bring into focus the people actually at the heart of this and the people this might be affecting. I think this cartoon does it pretty well. This is Sandeep who's tweeting this editorial cartoon. The real divide among the farmers of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, and you see two farmers here. We need water to cultivate our land, and on the other side you see politicians who say we need fire to cultivate the vote bank. So the actual people at the heart of this unfortunately are not being served by their leaders, which is what this cartoon seems to say. Leo?
Yeah, I think the cartoon is actually making a very honest portrayal of what's going on here. I think both sides have played this game in a very dirty and mercenary way. In fact, I would argue that, I heard what Janak and Mandakini said. I would argue that we're already facing a situation where every year is a drought year, even though there is good rainfall. Just to illustrate that, half of the city of Bangalore does not at all get water from the river Kaveri. So these people have to depend on groundwater. Where I live, I depend on groundwater. And the groundwater levels are also falling sharply. What I would like to say is the demand on the Kaveri water is increasing every year. And there is no effort made by any of the state governments to actually try and work a process in which going forward, we will actually minimize the demand on the river, either for cities, industries, and for agriculture. There is no discussion outside of the drought season between farmers, between academicians, between civil society, between media persons. I mean, we are not even in a different country. We are in the same country, and we fight over a river based on an identity which is marked by language. I mean, that is the most disastrous type of cocktail of factors one can imagine. And I recall what Janak said in 1991. Yes, that not only led to 100,000 people fleeing the city, but it also led to 19 deaths. That situation is very much there even now. And one needs to be very, very worried about the fact that the Karnataka Chief Minister, just about 4 hours ago, he spoke to the media and he said, the Supreme Court order is unimplementable. Now, what does that mean? I think it's a very dangerous situation if the state says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to let the water to the downstream riparian.
Yeah, but here's the thing, on why people are not taking this a little bit more seriously. So we have people who are echoing that sentiment, like Salman over here on Facebook, who says India is the biggest democracy in the world. Diversity is vast and just as vast as water bodies are here. This can be resolved with mutual sharing and coordinated measures by farmers and the central government, but there must not be geopolitics or vote bank politics. On the vote bank politics comment in particular, Mandakini, I want to ask you just a little bit bluntly, do you think that people are afraid to take responsibility for this action because there's an election coming up and they want to seem like they're too compromising, that actually could end up hurting them in the upcoming election as opposed to resolving this issue seriously?
Well, I think what's happening is essentially...
Mandakini, you can go first. Yep.
Oh, okay. No, I think what's happening is what we're really not addressing the core issue, which is the fact that whether it's Karnataka or Tamil Nadu, there's serious concerns around the way water is being managed, right? So whether it's groundwater, whether it's surface water, essentially we're a country that's facing massive water scarcity, right? So we need to think about more concrete measures in terms of what are the steps that Karnataka government needs to take or Tamil Nadu government needs to take to use the water that it does have more efficiently, and that means working with farmers, incentivizing them to use less water intensive crops. I mean, large parts of Tamil Nadu cultivate paddy, which is a hugely intensive, water intensive crop. So, do we need to think about more adaptive strategies, because we are looking at a more intense climate, a more climate variable future and world. So I think, vote banks is one thing, but I think it's in a sense masking the real issues at hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I just like to say that
Aman, go first, and then Janak. Let's let Aman in, and then Janak will go to you. Go ahead, Aman.
Well, just 2 quick points. One, Karnataka's next election is in 2018, and Tamil Nadu's just had an election. So I don't think it's directly into an electoral cycle. I think I'd like to kind of just buttress Mandakini's point, which is that if we just take the example of Bangalore, right? So Bangalore gets 50% of the Kaveri's water allowance for Karnataka for domestic purposes. And Bangalore also wastes 50% of the water that it gets. So 50% of the water that Bangalore city gets is either unbilled or wasted or leaks out of leaky infrastructure. So it's not like both these states are doing the best they can to manage this water in the best way that they can, right? So I think that's something that needs to be talked about a lot. And it's not just Bangalore and Tamil Nadu, right? It's also Delhi, where I've done a lot of reporting, which also till recently had figures of up to 60% of water being unaccounted for. So you build huge dams like we do in Delhi, up in the Himalayas. You displace like hundreds of thousands of people to build the reservoir. Then you waste a huge amount of water pumping into your city, and then you waste it in the city. So the entire kind of matrix of urban water supply is absolutely shot.
I want to give Janak a chance to respond to that, because it's funny, Aman, when you mentioned that, I actually had this headline to show, and then you read it out for me. Kaveri Water Row, Bengaluru wastes about 50% of its water. This is out of the IB Times, International Business Times. So Janak, is this a case of water not being used appropriately, efficiently?
Absolutely, that's a very, very good point made both by Mandakini and other person. The issue is that, for instance, the irrigation system that both in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka is very, very age-old. We don't have a modernized canal network and the proper control structures. If you have a modernized canal network and control structures, I am assuring you we can save at least 30% of water, which means so much of water can be added to your supply, number one. Number two, the drinking water. For instance, Bangalore city wants something like 16 TMC feet of water for drinking purposes. But Bangalore also wastes something like 40% of its supply towards leakages. And so I think these are some of the issues which the government should address rather than fighting over the water. If these issues are addressed properly, I think our dispute can be resolved reasonably well. I think these are some of the issues I think politicians should take care immediately.
Yeah, and right on that note, we have Prasant over here on Twitter who says, this fight has a history of 1,000 years, deforestation and rapid expansion of Bangalore, one of the important reasons for this fight. And we have Vikram who says, other factors include unplanned growth of cities and the inability of the state to prioritize the allocation of water resources. Leo, do you see it that way, that this is just essentially growth that is moving too fast for infrastructure?
I think Prashant and Vikram just told my words. If you look at the deforestation rates in the Kaveri Basin, especially where the forests are in the Kodugu, Mysore districts, it's phenomenal. The forest department has done nothing much but protect the core forests. As a result, the type of rains we get can actually be absorbed by this old growth forest, which we are felling massively. The second problem is that the intensity of extraction has been phenomenal in the past decade. Bangalore and Mysore is separated by about 140 kilometers, and there are 8 very old cities. And we're proposing 5 more new cities. Now, where is the water for that? And the city, which is now 10 million people, was a quarter population in the early 90s when riots broke out. So when we think about the dynamics of massive populations distressed, Going forward, I think we need to be very worried about the type of stress people are facing day in and day out. Not having drinking water, forget for bathing and other needs, is a pretty serious issue here. And the worst thing is this, that we are wasting water is one problem, but we're also contaminating the river. Almost 60% of the city's sewage goes back into the Kaveri, and we just guide it straight into the Mettur Dam, which is on the Tamil Nadu side. And then what happens in Mettur is that there are all sorts of aluminum refineries and factories and thermal power plants downstream there. There is really no interest in politics to care for the river. The river is dying. And in the next 30, 40 years, I really worry about the future of all this infrastructure and urbanization and industrialization, plus also the farming communities.
Leo, I don't think you're the only one. This is another headline pretty much summing up what you just said. Glimpse into the future. This is out of the Hindustan Times. India braced for more Kaveri-like water wars. I mean, you've reported about how this is not just something that Karnataka and Tamil Nadu are facing. This is something you also see in Delhi and other parts of India. Do you see it, as this headline puts it, water wars to come?
Well, I think that the war analogy is kind of overblown, right? I think it unnecessarily kind of sets up a militaristic language. I mean, in India right now, this is a really tense time as well, just in terms of what's happening on the border. I think that language like this I think it makes for sexy headlines, but I think this is stuff that can be resolved, and I think that to set up the debate in this way only, I think, limits the number of outcomes that can come out of it by suggesting that we are already in a kind of zero-sum game moment, right? So I would kind of resist that. But is this very serious? Yes, this is very serious.
Yep. So we have also people who are talking about, we have a dude from the 90s, interesting name, who has a couple of interesting tweets. He says, what is funny is that India and Pakistan share water from the Indus River without any issues, but Karnataka and Tamil Nadu cannot. And he goes on to say the issue might be intensely handled and massively politicized, insensitively handled rather, but going forward, people are going to fight over water, not over oil. So taking a very macro look at this and at the fact that drinking water is estimated to be going down, it's not really just an India problem. Mandakini, do you think that this is the new frontier, essentially, that what is happening there right now is a microcosm, not just for what's going to happen in India, but really throughout the world?
Absolutely. I mean, I do a lot of work which is looking at some of the issues and challenges in terms of river sharing across borders. So between governments, between India and Nepal, India and Bangladesh, for instance, and we see similar issues. I think the fundamental problem is also the way in which we look at water and managing rivers, right? So the approach is very, I guess, hydrocratic, which is thinking about, piping and damming and kind of using rivers and thinking of rivers in terms of the flow of water, but not necessarily looking at it from a holistic perspective of biodiversity, of livelihoods, of environments, of the kind of ecosystems that depend on these rivers. And of course, within South Asia, you have many treaties, as that person just mentioned. You've had the Indus Treaty between India and Pakistan. You have other treaties that exist, but it's really issues in terms of the lack of ability of many of these institutions to be able to deal with the challenges that are coming up with an increasingly water scarce world. We talked about climate change, but climate change is having a serious impact on South Asia, where you look at snow melt in the glaciers that's affecting the quantum of water that's flowing down rivers like the Indus, the Ganga, the Brahmaputra. It's having impacts in terms of access to groundwater. We're seeing more intense droughts. We're seeing more intense flooding, and the question is really, I agree with Aman that the analogy of water wars is not necessarily a constructive one, because essentially this is a crisis we're all going to face, and the impacts are going to be tremendous. And we need to think about constructing a more useful framing for how we want to talk about some of these issues and challenges.
Wise words and a perfect place to end this conversation from Mandakini Suri. Our thanks also to Aman Sethi, Janakarajan Srinivasan, and Leo Saldana. I want to give the very last word to our community who's watching this show, many of them staying up late. What are they saying, Omar?
I'll leave you with this thought from Rahul over here, who says there is nothing such as a water crisis. As a society, we must plan a system and balance the adequateness of water.
That's it for today's show, but the conversation continues online. Stream.aljazeera.com.